Thomas Webb stood behind the counter of his small bookshop on Maple Street. Rain tapped gently against the windows as he arranged a stack of new arrivals. It had been 3 years since Emily passed away, and the shop they had built together now felt too large, too empty. The bell above the door hadn't rung all morning. Thomas glanced at his watch, nearly noon. Years ago, the lunch rush would bring in office workers looking for something to read during their break. Now they probably scrolled on their phones instead. He ran his finger along a shelf, wiping away dust. The shop smelled of old paper and forgotten stories. Thomas had always loved that smell. It reminded him of possibilities. But lately, it only reminded him of what he had lost. The financial papers on his desk told a clear story. Online stores were taking over. His little corner of literary heaven was becoming a relic. 3 more months of sales like this, and he would need to make hard decisions. Thomas made his way to the window display. Emily had always handled this part. She knew how to catch people's eyes, how to arrange books so they called to passers-by. His attempts never quite looked right. As he adjusted a novel, he noticed a woman standing outside. She was looking at the display with curious eyes, her gray-streaked hair damp from the rain. She caught him watching and smiled. The bell jingled as she entered, shaking water from her umbrella. "Nasty weather we're having," she said, her voice warm and friendly. Thomas nodded, surprised by the disruption to his quiet day. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm Rose Fletcher," she said, extending her hand. "Just moved to the neighborhood. My grandson told me this shop has the best children's books in town." "Your grandson has good taste," Thomas replied, managing a small smile. It was the first real conversation he'd had in days. "The children's section is in the back corner." Rose followed him past shelves of mysteries and romances. "How long have you owned this shop?" 22 years, Thomas said. "My wife and I opened it right after we got married." "That's lovely," Rose said. She didn't ask where his wife was now, and Thomas was grateful. The children's corner was still decorated with the colorful cushions and small chairs that Emily had chosen. The painted tree on the wall was fading a bit, but the owls and squirrels she had added still peered out from between branches. "My grandson is 7, Rose explained. Smart as a whip but doesn't care much for reading yet. I'm hoping to change that." Thomas felt something stir inside him, a small spark of his old bookseller enthusiasm. "I might have just the thing." He reached for a book about a young boy who discovers a secret door in his garden. This one tends to work magic on reluctant readers. Rose took the book, flipping through its illustrated pages. "This looks perfect. I'll take it." As Thomas wrapped the book in paper, Rose looked around the shop. "Do you ever do reading events?" "My last neighborhood had a bookshop that hosted story hours." "We used to," Thomas said quietly. "My wife was good at that sort of thing." Rose nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Well, I'm part of a community group that's looking for ways to connect with local children. If you ever consider starting them up again, I'd be happy to help." Thomas handed her the wrapped book and her change. "I'll keep that in mind." He expected her to leave then, but Rose lingered. "I'll be back next week to let you know how he likes it. Maybe you could recommend another?" "I'd be happy to," Thomas said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. After Rose left, the shop felt different somehow. Still quiet, but not quite as empty. Thomas found himself looking at the children's corner, remembering the Saturday mornings when Emily would sit in the reading chair, surrounded by wide-eyed children. That evening, as Thomas locked up the shop, he noticed the community bulletin board across the street. Something about Rose's visit had stirred old memories, good ones. For the first time in months, he thought about what could be instead of what had been. Little did Thomas know that this simple meeting would be the first step on a journey that would not only save his bookshop but also help him find his way back to life. Rose became a regular visitor to Thomas's bookshop. Each Tuesday morning, she would arrive with her umbrella, rain or shine, and browse the shelves. She always had a story about her grandson Oliver's reaction to the previous week's book. "He stayed up past his bedtime to finish it," she reported one day, her eyes twinkling. "His mother was cross, but I was secretly pleased. Thomas found himself looking forward to these Tuesday conversations. They were small moments of connection in his otherwise solitary days. "You should join our community center group," Rose suggested during one of her visits. She was examining a book of poetry while rain streaked the windows. "We're trying to start a reading program for local children, but we need someone who really knows books." Thomas felt a flutter of anxiety. "I'm not good with people anymore, Rose." "Nonsense," she replied, closing the poetry book. "You're just out of practice." That night, Thomas found himself pulling an old photo album from the bookshelf in his flat above the shop. The pages were slightly sticky from disuse. Emily smiled back at him, dressed as a witch for Halloween story time, surrounded by children in costumes. Another photo showed her with a group of teenagers, all holding the same book for their summer reading club. "I miss it all," he whispered to her picture. "I miss who I was with you." Thomas couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Rose's invitation and the empty feeling in his shop. At dawn, he walked to the bakery at the end of the street for fresh bread. As he passed the other shops, he noticed something concerning: a for-lease sign in the window of the toy shop across from his bookstore. Old Mr. Wilson was standing inside, packing items into boxes. Thomas tapped on the window. Mr. Wilson looked up and gestured for him to come in. "Closing after 30 years, Mr. Wilson said without preamble. "Can't compete with those big box stores and online shopping." "I know what you mean," Thomas replied, looking around at the wooden trains and hand-stitched dolls. "It's a shame. Your shop is special." "Was special," Mr. Wilson corrected. "Times change, Thomas. Maybe our street isn't meant for shops like ours anymore." Walking back to his bookstore, Thomas felt a heaviness in his chest. The street had once been filled with thriving small businesses. Now, empty storefronts sat between the survivors. But something stirred inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Was it anger? Determination? Whatever it was, it felt better than the numbness that had been his companion for so long. When Rose arrived the following Tuesday, Thomas was waiting with a pot of tea. "I have an idea," he told her, his voice carrying a new energy. "What if the reading program happened here, in the shop? We have the space, the books, and..." He gestured to the faded but still charming children's corner. Rose's face lit up. "That would be perfect. The community center is so sterile, but this has character." They set a date for the first reading day. Thomas put a sign in the window and Rose spread the word through her community group. They agreed to start small, just 1 hour on Saturday morning. In the days leading up to it, Thomas found himself cleaning with purpose. He dusted shelves that had been neglected, washed the windows, and even pulled out the old reading chair from the storage room. It needed new upholstery, but it would serve for now. He also did something he hadn't done in months: he ordered new children's books. The sales representative sounded surprised to hear from him. "Glad you're still in business, Thomas," she said. "We've lost too many good independent shops." The morning of the first reading day, Thomas woke with a knot in his stomach. What if no one came? What if he couldn't connect with the children the way Emily had? He was arranging cookies, brought by Rose, on a plate when the bell jingled. A woman with 2 small children entered, looking uncertain. "Is this where the story time is happening?" she asked. "Yes," Thomas managed, his voice only slightly shaky. "Welcome." By 11 o'clock, 5 children sat on cushions around Thomas's feet. He held up the book, a tale about a lonely lighthouse keeper who makes friends with the sea creatures, and began to read. His voice grew stronger with each page turned. By the end, the children sat spellbound. "Will you do this again?" asked a small boy with glasses, Rose's grandson Oliver. Thomas met Rose's eyes over the children's heads. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Yes," Thomas said. "Same time next week." Word spread quickly in their small town. The next week, 12 children came to the reading hour. Parents lingered, browsing books while they waited. The bell above the door jingled more frequently, and Thomas found himself helping customers find novels again instead of just sitting behind the counter. By the third week, 20 children squeezed into the corner, sitting cross-legged on the floor when the cushions ran out. Thomas read with growing confidence, changing his voice for different characters and pausing at exciting moments to let the suspense build. "You're a natural," Rose told him afterward, as they picked up scattered cushions. "The children adore you." Thomas felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "It feels good to use these books again. They've been sitting on shelves for too long." For the first time since Emily's death, Thomas ordered a significant amount of new stock. He cleaned out dusty corners and rearranged displays. The shop began to reflect his renewed care, bright, welcoming, alive with possibility. One Saturday, after a particularly successful reading hour, a young mother approached him. Her daughter clutched a book to her chest. "We've lived here for 2 years," the mother said, "but we've never been in before. I didn't know such a wonderful shop existed in our town." Thomas realized then how invisible he had become. How invisible he had allowed his shop to become. That evening, as he locked up, he noticed other shop owners watching him. The bakery owner, James, waved him over as he walked past. "Whatever you're doing," James said, handing Thomas a still warm loaf of bread, "it's bringing life back to the street. My Saturday sales have doubled since you started those reading things." Thomas walked home that night looking up at the stars instead of down at his feet. The bread was warm against his chest, like the feeling growing inside him. The following week, a teenage girl knocked on the shop door early, before opening time. "I'm Emma," she said when Thomas opened up. "My mom said you need help with your story hour." Thomas hadn't realized he needed help, but when 30 children arrived that Saturday, he was grateful for Emma's assistance. She organized the children by age group and helped the younger ones find seats. "I want to be a teacher," she told Thomas as they tidied up afterward. "I could come every Saturday, if you'll have me." "I'd be grateful," Thomas said, and meant it. Emma brought a friend the next week, a boy named Peter who played guitar. He could do a musical story, Emma suggested. Thomas agreed, and the children were enchanted. Soon, Thomas's reading circle expanded. Teenagers came after school to discuss young adult novels. A group of elderly residents asked if they could form a classics book club that would meet in the shop on Thursday evenings. "We'll buy the books from you, of course," they assured him. The financial papers on Thomas's desk began to tell a different story. Not a dramatic turnaround, but a steady improvement. Enough that he could breathe again. He hired Emma part-time, and her friend Peter occasionally. Their young energy and ideas refreshed the shop. "We could do poetry nights," Peter suggested. "Open mic style. And maybe partner with the bakery for refreshments." Thomas surprised himself by saying yes. The first poetry night brought 20 people to the shop after hours. Some read published works, others shared original poems. Thomas found himself reading Emily's favorite poem, his voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. The most unexpected change came when Mr. Wilson visited the shop one afternoon. The elderly toy shop owner looked around with appreciative eyes. "You've done something remarkable here, Thomas," he said. "I was wrong to give up so easily." Thomas offered him a cup of tea. "The street feels different now." Mr. Wilson nodded. "I've been watching. Seeing what you've done here, well, I've spoken to my landlord. I'm reopening the toy shop next month." Thomas felt a rush of emotion. Emily always said our street was special. That it just needed the right care. "She was right," Mr. Wilson said, sipping his tea. "And you've reminded us all." That night, Thomas wrote in his journal for the first time since Emily died, "I think I'm finding my way back. Not to who I was before, but to someone new who still carries all the love we shared." The following day brought an unexpected letter. It was from the town council. They wanted to recognize his contribution to revitalizing the local community. The letter mentioned a small ceremony the following month. Thomas read it twice, then placed it beside a photo of Emily. "Look at what we're doing," he whispered. "We're waking things up again." Thomas's bookshop continued to transform with each passing week. The children's corner expanded to include a small stage where Peter could play his guitar during musical story hours. Emma painted fresh woodland creatures on the walls, bringing new life to Emily's original design. The shop's revival spread to neighboring businesses. Mr. Wilson reopened his toy shop with a fresh approach, focusing on wooden toys and puzzles that complemented the books Thomas sold. The two shops began planning joint events. "We could do a treasure hunt," Mr. Wilson suggested. "Children would follow clues between our shops." James from the bakery joined their planning sessions, offering to create themed treats for each event. "Book-shaped cookies for story time, puzzle piece pastries for game days," he proposed. The street that had once been dying now buzzed with activity. Empty storefronts began to fill with new businesses: a craft shop, a small cafe, a local artist's gallery. People walked more slowly down the street, stopping to look in windows and chat with neighbors. Thomas found himself at the center of this revival, though he never sought the role. He simply tended his own garden, as Emily would have said, and others followed his lead. One rainy Tuesday, Rose arrived with an older gentleman in tow. "Thomas, this is George Parker from the town council," she said. "He wants to talk about your award." Thomas shook the man's hand. "It's really unnecessary," he insisted. "I'm just running my shop." George smiled. "What you've done goes far beyond that, Mr. Webb. The whole street has been transformed. Tax revenue is up. Tourism is increasing. And it all started with your Saturday reading hours." After they left, Thomas stood at his window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. He thought about how far he had come from those dark, silent days after Emily's death. The bell jingled, pulling him from his thoughts. A young woman entered, shaking water from her coat. "Are you Thomas?" she asked. When he nodded, she continued, "I'm Laura James from the local paper. I'd love to do a story about your bookshop and how you've helped revitalize the street." Thomas felt a flutter of anxiety. "I'm not very comfortable with attention." Laura's expression was kind. "The story isn't just about you. It's about community, about how one small action can create ripples of change. People need stories like that." Thomas considered her words. "Emily, my late wife, always said that stories matter because they show us what's possible." "She sounds wise," Laura replied. "Would you tell me about her? About how you started this shop together?" For the next hour, Thomas shared stories he had kept locked inside for years. He showed Laura pictures of the shop's early days, of Emily hosting reading hours, of the street when it was first a bustling center of local business. "She would love what's happening now," Thomas said. "She always believed in the power of books to bring people together." When the article appeared the following week, Thomas was surprised by how accurately it captured the spirit of what was happening on their street. Laura had written not just about the bookshop's revival but about the community that had formed around it. The phone began ringing more frequently. People from neighboring towns wanted to know the shop's hours. A school principal called to ask if Thomas would consider hosting class visits. "We've been taking students to the big chain bookstore," she explained, "but we'd rather support a local business with such strong community values." Thomas hired a second part-time employee, a retired English teacher named David who had a gift for recommending the perfect book to even the most reluctant reader. One evening as they closed the shop, Emma asked, "Have you thought about expanding? The space next door is still empty." Thomas hadn't considered it, but the idea took root. The shop was becoming crowded during events. More space would allow them to host larger gatherings, perhaps even small musical performances or author talks. That night, Thomas dreamed of Emily. They were arranging books together as they had done countless times in reality. "You've done well," Dream Emily told him, shelving a novel with care. "But don't forget why we started this in the first place." "To share stories," Thomas answered in his dream. "To create a place where stories could find their readers." Emily smiled. "And to be happy doing it." Thomas woke with tears on his face, but they weren't tears of grief. For the first time in years, they were tears of gratitude, for what had been, and for what was becoming. The next morning, he called the landlord about the empty space next door. It was time for a new chapter. On a warm summer evening, 6 months after Rose first walked into his shop, Thomas stood on the small stage in the town square. Faces looked up at him: Rose, Emma, Peter, James, Mr. Wilson, and dozens of others he now knew by name. The mayor held a small plaque, waiting to present it. Thomas had never been comfortable with public speaking. Emily had always handled that part of their business. But as he looked out at the gathering, he felt a gentle peace replace his nervousness. "I didn't do anything special," he began, his voice carrying across the square. "I just remembered what my wife Emily always knew, that books bring people together, and people bring streets to life." He spoke about the journey, how one reading hour had led to another, how connections had formed and strengthened, how a street of dying businesses had found new purpose. "This award should be shared among all of us," he concluded. Every shop owner who stayed when leaving would have been easier. Every parent who brought their children to story time. Every teenager who helped paint walls or move furniture or share ideas. Applause washed over him as the mayor presented the plaque. Thomas caught sight of Laura from the newspaper, nodding as she took notes. Later, as fairy lights twinkled in the trees and people mingled in the square, Thomas found himself standing beside the new space, the extension to his bookshop that would open next week. The connecting door had been installed, the walls freshly painted. The sign painter had matched the original lettering perfectly: Webb and Company Books, stories for everyone. Rose joined him, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. She offered one to Thomas. "Emily would be proud," she said gently. "Yes," Thomas agreed, taking the lemonade. "But I think she'd also tell me to look forward now, not back." The expanded bookshop would include a proper event space, comfortable seating for the elderly book club members, and a larger children's area with a permanent stage. Thomas had also decided to add a small cafe corner, with James providing daily pastries. "I never expected any of this," Thomas admitted. "When you first walked into the shop, I was thinking about closing, not expanding." "Life has its own ideas sometimes," Rose replied. "We just have to be brave enough to follow where it leads." As they sipped their drinks, Oliver ran up to them, clutching a book. "Grandma! Mr. Webb! Look what Mr. Wilson gave me." He held up a wooden bookmark carved with an owl, the symbol from their reading hour. "Mr. Wilson says he's making them for all the reading club kids," Oliver explained. "And I helped design it." After Oliver ran off to show his friends, Thomas and Rose walked slowly through the square. Neighbors greeted them, sharing news and plans. The craft shop owner was collaborating with the gallery on classes for children. The cafe was extending its hours for poetry nights. Thomas realized that the street had become what Emily had always envisioned, not just a place for commerce, but a place for community. Back at the bookshop, Thomas unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell welcomed him, old paper and possibilities. But now it was joined by fresh paint and new wood. He walked to the counter where a photograph stood in a simple frame: Emily on opening day, 23 years ago, her smile radiant with hope and purpose. "We did it, love," he whispered. "It took me a while, but we got there." The next morning, Thomas woke early. He had preparations to make before the expanded shop's opening celebration. As he made tea, he looked out his window at the street below. Shop owners were already sweeping their sidewalks, arranging window displays. Mr. Wilson waved up at him from outside the toy shop. Thomas raised his mug in greeting. The bookshop window glowed warmly in the morning light. The new sign caught the sun, its gold lettering shining. Webb and Company Books. Thomas had added the and Company to honor all who had become part of this story. Tomorrow would bring new readers, new stories, new possibilities. The grief was still there, a quiet companion rather than the heavy burden it had once been. Thomas had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding the strength to create something new from what remains. His heart had expanded to hold both his past and his future. As he prepared to head downstairs and open for the day, Thomas paused by the mirror in his hallway. The man looking back at him was different from the one who had stood there a year ago. There was light in his eyes again, purpose in his stance. "One page at a time," he told his reflection. "That's how all the best stories unfold."